Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Mossy Smart. Let's jump into this week's questions. First question comes from Muhammad Al-Hari from YouTube. Is Hyrule Warriors a Zelda game? Yes. It's like a hybrid Zelda Dynasty Warriors game. If I had to put it in one of the two categories, I would say it's more of a Dynasty Warriors game than a Zelda game. But it's still enjoyable. It's fun. I recently restarted playing it after taking about a year off. I'm about 150 hours into the game, and I always describe the game as it is the most mediocre video game that I absolutely cannot put down. I just keep playing it. 150 hours. Alright, next question comes from Spiritual Mask Salesman from Zelda Forum. The Downfall timeline has gotten negative feedback from some fans. It's often ridiculed as being an easy way out for Nintendo to find a place for A Link to the Past and its problematic plot when applied to pre-Hyrule Historia 2 split timeline theories. Bit of a mouthful. Do you think it was ingenuity on Nintendo's part that they could exploit a third split to explain their own timeline, or laziness not to adhere to the standard of timelines popular before Hyrule Historia? Well, oh boy. I would say, I used to follow the Zelda timeline quite a bit, and I think that when Ocarina of Time first came out, so when there was only 5 Zelda games, I think it was pretty clear that Ocarina of Time was a prequel to A Link to the Past, and that there were a lot of solid connections between the titles. In particular, the A Link to the Past talked about the imprisoning war and its backstory, and A Link to the Past had a very elaborate backstory. And while a lot of things didn't perfectly match up, there were clearly some connections with the backstory of A Link to the Past with Ocarina of Time. Not completely, but it was there. And I kind of view that Nintendo sort of just threw that to the wayside when they started releasing more Zelda games. And they just didn't really care, I think, about the timeline as the overarching timeline about all the games. And I think maybe they always, they've noted that they've always had this document and they always had, placement of the games. But I don't necessarily think they did a great job with the storytelling in terms of Hyrule Historia, with how they linked all the games. I would say, in particular, I don't think they did a good job with making too many sequels to Ocarina of Time. Like, A Link to the Past was the sequel. That was what it was. And then, Wind Waker came around, and that was also the sequel. And then Twilight Princess came, and that was also the sequel. And then we're like, was A Link to the Past still a sequel? Turns out it was, but it just got too convoluted. And it's kind of, part of me thinks it's kind of unfortunate that Hyrule Historia actually came out, because I think the Zelda series kind of lost a bit of its mystique when it comes to fans trying to piece together the games in a structured timeline. That doesn't exist as much now, and kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. And yes. All right. Next question comes from DoritoMan093. What do you think about emulators? Well, I think I know what you mean with this question, but I mean, there's nothing really wrong with emulators, so to speak. Nintendo uses emulators themselves. When you download a NES or a virtual console game on the Wii or Wii U, it's not running on original hardware. It's being emulated to work on the modern console. So yeah, I think you mean ROMs, or illegally purchasing, downloading games or whatnot. And it's kind of a sad state of affairs to an extent. I mean, a few years ago, I remember one of my buddies, he had an iPhone, or no, an Android device, and he was playing Super Mario World. It was some bootleg version that somebody put it on the Android store, and I think it got taken down. But I mean, yeah, that actually happens, and it's just not. It just feels weird. It's wrong. It's not the moral thing to do. It's stealing. It really is. Fortunately, with the Zelda series nowadays, almost the entire library of games is available on the 3DS or the Wii U in terms of virtual console and downloads and some of the recent remakes. With a few exceptions, like Four Swords Adventures is not playable, and Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks are not playable in the US, but they are on the Virtual Console in Europe. Nevertheless, almost all the Zelda games can be purchased with modern hardware. So I hope that lessens the reason that there needs to be, it's legal activity going on. So yeah, that's the short answer, I guess. Next question comes from Christoph Gave from YouTube. What are your top 3 dungeons from Twilight Princess? We actually did a back at Zelda Dungeon. There was a series we run called ZD Tops, where we would give like a weekly countdown of some of our favorite things, and like each of the team members would post their top 5 or top 10, whatever it was. We did top Twilight Princess dungeons, and it was nice to see what all the other team members thought. To me, my favorite was the Lakebed Temple. I think the Lakebed Temple is the best water-based dungeon in the Zelda series. I really enjoyed it because I liked the puzzle aspects of, you had to go to the top of one side, get the water, spin the staircase, got the water to flow, and that created like almost a new environment on that side of the dungeon, which you later had to get the water flowing, and it was just cool. I liked the puzzle aspects. I think it was pretty well done. And despite it being a water-based dungeon, which I usually don't like, this had a lot of more land-based elements, so it was sort of a hybrid. I just thought it was very well done, and I thought it was the best dungeon in Twilight Princess. That being said, I thought the Forest Temple, I think that's the best first dungeon, or at least one of the best opening dungeons. It was simplistic in the grand scheme of things, but more elaborate than most first dungeons are in Zelda games. Those are 2 of the good ones. I mean, City in the Sky was okay, kind of long, a bit frustrating at times. Palace of Twilight, too short, way too short. Hyrule Castle didn't really feel like it. I mean, I can go. I know a lot of people like Arbiter's Grounds. That was cool. Snow Peak Ruins. That might probably be my 3rd one. If I would probably go Lakebed, Forest Temple, Snow Peak Ruins. Now I wonder what I actually put on that countdown back in the day. But this is a question that if you ask me 6 months from now, my opinion might change on it, even though it's a 10-year-old game. Go figure. Alright, last question comes from Aiden Butterworth. What type of dungeon format do you think we'll see in Zelda Wii U? Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess style dungeons that have many rooms and take a while to complete? Or Skyward Sword style dungeons that have large rooms but less of them and are much quicker to complete? Or do you think Zelda Wii U will introduce a new dungeon format that we haven't seen before, such as dungeons that are attached to the overworld and aren't separate experiences? I don't actually agree with all of the premise of your question, in particular with Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword, take the Lanayru mining facility, for example, the 3rd dungeon in the game. That really, I believe, only had maybe 6, maybe 7. There might be tiny rooms in general. It was not that many rooms. That was a very long dungeon. I imagine most people probably took them about an hour to finish that dungeon. I think that dungeon was comparable in size to, say, or in terms of duration as, Dragon Roost Cavern from Wind Waker, or the Shadow Temple from Ocarina of Time. Even though the Ocarina of Time dungeons had more rooms, I don't think the Skyward Sword dungeons were shorter. I think the Earth Temple in Skyward Sword was short, but in general they were actually kind of lengthy. I like a mixture. I think Skyward Sword's dungeons were good. There was just not that many of them. I like having a lot of dungeons, but the Sand Ship is a perfect example. Such a unique dungeon where you kind of were constantly revisiting areas, but changing with the time shift stone, and it was going past the present, and it was constrained, but very well done. I love that dungeon. Then I also like the more traditional, Ocarina of Time, based on the Forest Temple and Ocarina of Time. A lot of rooms, a lot of different areas, a lot of puzzles. You go through. It leads to dead ends, and you have to change path and try a different area. I mean, very well done. So I think there is a perfect blend that could be reached. And your idea about dungeons in the overworld, I think that can work too. And I'll throw in some mini dungeons as well, like the Ice Cavern from Ocarina of Time, or even in Skyward Sword, in that area before the sand ship, there was a number of like small areas that were almost like mini dungeons of sorts. So I think a combination is good. I still think I'd always like to see some traditional big bulky dungeons that have a lot of rooms. But then I like the unique things. Throw in a few wild cards from here and there. I do like a lot of dungeons. I always feel that dungeons are the most important aspect of a Zelda game. I shouldn't say that, but I like having a large amount of dungeons, I should say. So, good question. Alright, thanks for the questions, guys, this week. By this time next week, hopefully most of us will be playing Twilight Princess HD. So, I think next week we will do a more Twilight Princess HD post-release Q&A. So, I know this video is coming out before Twilight Princess HD, but after the game releases and you get to play it a little bit, come back on Saturday or Sunday and post your questions about the game. And and you can ask your questions in the comments below at Zelda Informer, in the comments at YouTube, at the forums, or emailing me at webmaster@zeldadungeon.net. Till next week, take care.